Look around you right now. What you see seems solid, real, independent of you. It seems as though it would exist exactly like this even if you weren't here to observe it. But quantum physics, neuroscience, and the oldest wisdom traditions in the world all say the same thing. What you call reality is far stranger, more fluid, and more dependent on you than you imagine. Not as a poetic metaphor, as the most precise description that science and wisdom can offer. This episode will change the way you perceive every object, every person, every moment of your life. Not because it will give you a new belief, but because it will show you that the belief you hold right now is wrong. The universe is not a collection of solid objects separated by empty space. It never was. It never will be. It is a continuous field of information that collapses into specific forms when observed by a consciousness. You are not inside the universe observing it. You are the process through which the universe observes itself. This is not vague philosophy. It is the most radical and best supported conclusion of physics over the last 100 years. And it is also the central teaching of the oldest wisdom traditions on the planet, word for word. Maya, samsara, Plato's cave, the matrix. These are all pointers to the same fundamental phenomenon. The world as you perceive it is not the world as it is. It is the reconstruction your mind makes of it. And that reconstruction, which seems so obvious, so given, so unquestionable, is filtered, limited, and colored. Colored by your memories, your beliefs, your traumas, your hopes, your conditionings. Two human beings in the very same room live in completely distinct subjective realities, and both are absolutely certain that what they see is the real world. Both are partially wrong. Welcome to the nature of human perception. Welcome to the deepest problem in philosophy, and welcome to the answer that is now emerging. From physics laboratories, neuroscience, and millennial traditions, an answer that is simultaneously disturbing and liberating, impossible to ignore, impossible to unlearn. Before revealing it, we need to build the scaffolding. We need physics, neuroscience, history. Because this truth without context sounds like madness. With context, it sounds like the only thing that makes sense. So let us begin. Let us begin with what physics discovered that should have been impossible to discover. Let us begin with the discovery Einstein called terrifying, and that changed everything we thought we knew. In 1927, at the Solvay Conference, the greatest physicists in the world gathered to discuss quantum mechanics. What they had discovered in the preceding years was so disturbing that many refused to believe their own data. The double-slit experiment revealed something impossible. Matter behaves differently when observed. A particle fired without observation creates a wave pattern, as though it passes through both slits simultaneously. The same particle, when observed, creates a particle pattern, as though it knows it is being watched. This is not an instrument error. It has been repeated thousands of times with every possible rigor. The result is always the same. The observer affects the observed. Consciousness affects matter. This is not an opinion. It is experimental data. Einstein did not accept it. He spent the rest of his life trying to prove it wrong. He never succeeded. Niels Bohr said, "If you are not shocked by quantum mechanics, you have not understood it." Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It is impossible to simultaneously know the position and momentum of a particle. Not because our instruments are inadequate, because reality itself is indeterminate before measurement. The particle has no defined position before it is measured. It exists in a superposition of all possible positions. The measurement, the act of knowing, collapses the superposition into a specific reality. Knowing creates the known. This is the collapse of the wave function. And this is the point where physics meets philosophy and the wisdom traditions. John Wheeler, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, went even further. He proposed the participatory universe. There is no universe without an observer. The universe requires observers to exist. Without mind, without matter. Wheeler even proposed that the universe is, in some fundamental sense, made of information. It from bit. Matter emerges from information. Information requires consciousness to have meaning. Therefore, Consciousness is primary. Max Planck, the father of quantum physics, said, "Consciousness is fundamental. Matter is derived from it, not as metaphysical speculation, as the logical conclusion of the physics he himself helped create." And here we arrive at the point where modern physics meets the Vedanta of 2,500 years ago. Vedanta says, Brahman, pure consciousness, is the only reality. The material world is its manifestation. Maya does not mean that the world does not exist. It means that it does not exist in the way you think it does. The stone is real as experience. But its apparent solidity, separation, and independence are projections of the mind. Plato knew this. The allegory of the cave is the most precise description of the human condition ever written. Prisoners in chains, seeing only shadows on the wall, they believe the shadows are reality. When one is freed and sees the sun, he returns to tell the others. They do not believe him. They prefer the familiar shadows. Plato was not describing a myth. He was describing epistemology, how knowledge works, and he was describing quantum physics 2,000 years before it existed. The sun is consciousness. The shadows are matter. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant formalized this in 1781, but with a radicality that still shocks today. Kant said, "We do not perceive the world as it is. We perceive the world as our mind constructs it. Space and time are not properties of the world. They are the forms through which our mind organizes experience. The noumenon, the thing as it really is completely inaccessible to direct human perception. We perceive only the phenomenon, the appearance our mind constructs from the signals it receives." Modern neuroscience confirms Kant with disconcerting precision. The brain is not a camera. It is a factory. 90% of the information the visual cortex processes comes from inside the brain, not from the eyes. You do not see the world. You see the prediction your brain makes of the world, compared against sensory data. Carl Friston calls this predictive coding. Anil Seth calls it a controlled hallucination. The reality you experience is literally a hallucination produced by your brain, a useful one, but a hallucination. Not different in kind from dream hallucinations, just more consistent, more shared, more stable. René Descartes arrived at the same point in 1641. How do I know I am not dreaming right now? He could not prove that he wasn't. The only certainty he found, there is thought. Therefore, there is being. But thought requires consciousness. Therefore, the most fundamental certainty of all is that there is consciousness. Everything else is inference. So what does this mean in practice? What changes when you understand that reality is a construction? First, suffering changes its nature, because suffering depends on how the mind interprets events, not the events themselves, the story the mind tells about them, the narrative the character self-constructs. The same event produces intense suffering in one person and mere inconvenience in another. What is the difference? The difference is the mental map each person uses to interpret the territory of experience. And maps can be updated, beliefs can be revised, narratives can be rewritten, reality can change, not the reality out there, the reality you experience, which is, for all practical purposes, the only one that exists for you. Second, the power you have over your experience is far greater than conditioning has taught you. Because if reality is a construction, you are the builder, and builders can learn to build differently. Third, the separation between you and the world is far more porous than it appears, and at a certain level, it does not exist. The principle of quantum entanglement, two particles that have interacted remain correlated forever, no matter the distance. A measurement on one instantly affects the other, faster than light. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance, and refused to believe it. But it is real. Confirmed. We live in a non-local universe. The separation that seems so obvious is an approximation, not a fundamental reality. You are entangled with the entire universe in a way no instrument can fully map. Every atom in your body was forged in a star and was entangled with the universe before it became you. You are not in the universe. You are a temporary node in the network of relationships that the universe is. And if that is true, if separation is illusory, then what you do to others, you do to yourself. Not as a moral commandment, as a physical description, as the logical consequence of a non-local universe. Spiritual traditions arrived at this through direct experience. Physics arrived through mathematics. Buddhism says everything is interdependent. Nothing exists by itself. Everything exists in relation to everything else. Indra's net, a universe of jewels, each reflecting all the others, in an infinite web without a center. Every point in the universe reflects the entire universe. Holography, fractal, information distributed in everything. The holographic theory of the universe, proposed by David Bohm and reinforced by Leonard Susskind, is taken seriously. Bohm called it the implicate order, the non-manifest, undivided reality from which the visible world emerges. Like a hologram, the whole is in every part. Like a mind, the whole is in every thought. And if the universe is holographic, then what is outside and what is inside are not so different after all. As above, so below. Hermes Trismegistus described holographic physics 2,000 years ago. String theory proposes that fundamental reality is not made of particles, but of vibrating information. Particles are vibration patterns in these strings. Different frequencies, different particles. Matter as music. And if matter is a pattern of vibrating information, then the mind that processes information is more fundamental than matter. We arrive at the same place through string theory as through quantum mechanics. Consciousness is primary. The philosopher of mind David Chalmers called this the hard problem of consciousness. Why is there subjective experience? Why feel something rather than merely process information like a computer? No materialist theory can answer this, because experience is not reducible to physics. Chalmers proposes panpsychism. Consciousness is a fundamental property of reality, like mass or charge. Not that a stone feels as you feel, but that there is something experiential at every level of the organization of matter. This is not mysticism. It is the most philosophically rigorous position available given what quantum physics has discovered. And it is exactly what Vedanta, Buddhism, Taoism, and shamanic traditions have taught for millennia. But let us return to the practical. What changes in your life when you internalize that reality is a construction. Your relationship with beliefs changes. You stop confusing the map with the territory, the model with reality. Your beliefs are not reality. They are your best current approximation of reality, and they can be improved. The deepest revelation is not that reality is illusory. It is that you have more agency over it than you can imagine. Not total control, but real participation. The observer does not merely see, they co-create what is observed. Every belief you hold is literally shaping what you perceive, and therefore, what you experience. This is verifiable. Put a pessimist and an optimist in the same room for a day. Ask them to describe what happened. They will describe completely different days, because they literally lived completely different days. Attention is selective. The brain filters enormous amounts of information, only allowing through what confirms its model. The reticular activating system, the brain's filter, prioritizes what is consistent with your beliefs. That is why when you buy a new car, you start seeing that model everywhere. It was always there, you just weren't seeing it. And that is why when a core belief changes, the world literally appears different. Because for you, it is. This is not naive idealism. The chair is real, suffering is real, the stone hurts when it falls on your foot. But the meaning of the chair, the interpretation of suffering, the narrative about the stone, those are constructed, and it is at the level of meaning and interpretation that most human suffering takes place. Not physical pain, the story about the pain, not the loss itself, the narrative about what the loss means. Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz. He said, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space lies freedom." Frankl's external reality was the most complete horror human beings have ever created. His inner reality was free, not because he ignored reality, because he understood that the construction of meaning is the most sovereign domain that exists. This is the most powerful practical implication of everything we have discussed. You construct your inner world, and the inner world is the only world you truly inhabit. The exterior is merely the input. The interior is the experience. Working on the inner world is not escapism. It is the most pragmatic and powerful intervention that exists. Because no amount of external rearrangement changes a mind that recreates suffering from any circumstance. And a transformed mind finds richness, peace, and meaning in circumstances that others would call deprivation. This is not to say that external circumstances do not matter. They do, but they are secondary to the state of the mind. The fourth implication: if reality is partially constructed, it is partially reconstructible by the same builder, not magically, not instantly, but systematically. With the tools that neuroscience and wisdom provide, new beliefs create new filters. New filters create new perceptions. New perceptions create new experience. How does this apply to your daily life? In a much more concrete way than any philosophical concept. When you wake up tomorrow and your first thought is negative, notice. This is construction, not revelation. Do not deny it. Do not affirm it. Simply notice that it is a thought, an event in consciousness, not a fact about the world. When you enter into conflict with someone, notice. You are in conflict with your construction of that person. The real person is more complex, more multidimensional, and more vast than the model you have built of them. All interpersonal anger is, to some degree, anger at a map you yourself drew. This does not mean the other person bears no responsibility, but that your suffering comes from your construction. When you feel anxious about the future, notice, the future you fear is a construction. It does not yet exist. You are not suffering because of the future. You are suffering because of the future your mind is constructing right now, and you can construct a different one, not as denial, as a deliberate exercise of the power of construction that you have. When you remember the past with pain, notice, the past that hurts is a present construction of what happened. The event has passed. What persists is the story you keep telling about it, and it can be retold. This is not to deny what happened. It is to recognize that the pain does not come from the past, it comes from the present. The practice is simple and immeasurably difficult, noticing the construction in the moment it is happening. Not to change it immediately, just to see it. And the seeing, the recognition, already begins the transformation. Mindfulness meditation is, at its core, the training of precisely this capacity, perceiving without being swept away. Cognitive behavioral therapy is, at its core, the same thing in secular scientific language. Byron Katie's work, The Work, is a systematic method for questioning constructions that cause suffering. 4 questions that dissolve the most rigid constructions, not through willpower, through the power of clear seeing. Science confirms, beliefs change the brain, neuroplasticity, new patterns form with new perception. You literally rebuild your brain when you rebuild your beliefs about reality, and a rebuilt brain perceives realities that the previous one could not even imagine existed. Reality does not change, but the consciousness that perceives it changes. And that, for all practical purposes, changes everything. Reality is not what you think. It never was. And that is the best news there is. Because the reality you thought it was, rigid, separate, threatening, beyond your reach, does not exist. What exists is far more fluid, more responsive, more intimate, and more moldable than any dogma ever told you. More intimate because you are part of the process that creates it. More responsive because it responds to your consciousness. More moldable because it is partially constructed, and you are the builder, partially, but truly. And more mysterious, infinitely more mysterious, because the further physics advances, the less it knows what is real. Richard Feynman said, "If you think you understand quantum mechanics, you have not understood quantum mechanics. The most advanced physics that exists leads not to certainty but to mystery, not to closure but to openness." And the greatest mystics say the same thing. At the depth of experience, The mystery does not resolve, it deepens, not ignorance, living mystery. The presence of what cannot be reduced to concept, equation, or doctrine. You inhabit this mystery. You are this mystery. The consciousness that asks what is real is itself the answer. And to live from that understanding, with humility, with curiosity, with openness, is the wisest possible stance. Not the certainty of the fanatic, not the nihilism of the skeptic. The wondering openness of the being who knows it does not know. This openness is the foundation of all creativity, all compassion, all genuine learning, because none of those things are possible for a mind that believes it definitively knows what is real. Reality is not what you think, and for that reason, it can be better than you think. Much better. The universe you inhabit tomorrow depends in part on the constructs you choose to maintain today. And today, in this moment, the consciousness that perceives this is the very one that can reconstruct everything. Starting now,